Tartary, a vast country in the northeastern parts of Asia, bounded by Siberia to the north and west. This is called Great Tartary. I'm reading from the 1771 Encyclopedia Britannica. Here we have a book from 1681, and it's the Voyages of Jean Struyes in Tartary. Obviously, people are at war, and they have impressive ports and cities. Here we have depictions of the Tartary man and woman, stunning architecture, and of course, star forts, as you can see, surrounded by water, exactly as the Statue of Liberty is. And another thing to note is the architecture style here. We can see that it has the pillars, as well as the triangular piece here, circle in the middle. You might just recognize that if you looked at something like the U.S. Capitol building. 1777, letters of the origin of the sciences. And I have had to translate from French. We can see here that the Tartars, once masters of China. The Tartars had populated 1,200 years before the islands of the Eastern Sea. And the Japanese and the Tartars have a beautiful genius. The translation for this is right here. You can see the Tartars have a genie belliquous, and this is a beautiful genius. Translation to that is they're very intelligent. They have a beautiful genius. The Voyages of Ferdinand Mendez Pinto, 1583. A Tartar commander enters with his army into the town of Queensay. And it was also reported that one chief Tartar commander was coming not about a league and a half from Queensay with an army of 62,000 horse. And without being able to speak any word of any purpose, to save ourselves we prayed. A system of geography of the terraqueous globe. From 1744, the present state of Great Tartary. And listed in here amongst a bunch of other information, we can see that it has a whole section on government. So let's see what Wikipedia could say about this. Tartary, a blanket term used in Western European literature and cartography. Tartary became the most common name for Central Asia in a series of negatively colored names and had no connection with real polities, or that is, form of government, a form or process of civil government or constitution, an organized society. So it had no connection to any real government or society or ethnic groups of the region. So it's just a blanket term that they used to describe some area on the map. And it has no connection to any government or ethnic groups or anything like that. That's quite in contrast to what I've just seen from historical references. I'm calling bullshit on Wikipedia for this one. A general map of the kingdom of Tartaria. As we can see on this map, this Grand Tartary is larger than any of these other small countries like China, India, especially Europe. Here's Urbano Monet's map, and if we look at that, we can see that there are Tartarians here, Tartarians here, Tartarians here, here, Tartary, Tartarians. This whole entire area is all Tartarians. It looks like this girl may have had a bit of a slip there, but other than that, we can see this is the Grand Tartary, and again, it's depicting a people and a government. Of course, the books that we've already read, we know that they have armies with horses, buildings with a very familiar style of architecture, and in the division of the habitable earth in square miles, Tartary has control over more square miles at a whopping 3 million than any other country in the entire world. With detailed information on climate, government, trade, character, religion, customs. Tobacco they are immoderately fond of, but instead of blowing the smoke out of their mouths, they hold a little water in their mouths with which they swallow the smoke down, which so intoxicates them that they soon lose their senses and throw up the phlegm. And they will repeat this several times a day. Man, these guys sound like they know how to have a good time. And in curiosities, we can see that there is a great wall which separates Tartary from China, built by the Chinese to hinder the frequent incursions of the Tartars. Not the Mongols, but Tartars. Just as we can see on the map right here, a wall of 400 leagues built between the bottoms of the mountains by the King of China against the incursions of the Tartars. Because the King of Tartary has fallen upon the city of Pequin with such a great army as has never been seen since Adam's time, where 27 kings under whom marched 1,800,000 men, whereof 600,000 were on horse, and 80,000 rhinoceros that drew the wagons. And given that Queen Se is somewhere right around here, you could see why the Great Wall was built against the incursions of the Tartars. But remember, this is just an area that blanket term we use to put on the map for some area that didn't have any government or ethnic groups in the region at all. And if you think Tartarians are just Mongols, they definitely are not. There was plenty of Caucasian Tartarians, and I'm not sure why this guy looks like such a fruitcake, but he is, he's got his braids on and his pretty bows up here. Nevertheless, I'm not going to go to an axe fight with him because by the sounds of it, he has a rhinoceros to back him up. Russia and her colonies, 1952, talks about the Communist Party to proceed with a scientific revision of the history of Tartaria, and that this is intended to deprive Tartar history of all national Tartar features to the extent that it becomes Russian history. This is mentioned in the declassified CIA document from 1957. Tartar history was to be rewritten. Let us be frank, it was to be falsified. It looks like Tartary was multi-religious and multicultural. And here are some of the common depictions of leaders like Genghis Khan and what we think they look like in today's drawings. However, here are the 15th to 18th century books and how they saw these same people. Here is Genghis Khan with his wife. And some more depictions here of Genghis Khan. Again, much different than what we would perceive Genghis Khan to look like today. Here's Tamerlane, and you could see here quite a different resemblance to the common depiction of, we assume that he was a Mongol, so he would look like one of these guys. And according to history, certainly not a Mongol, looking much more what we would call European. In fact, this would be a Tartarian. And couldn't find any 17th or 18th century Batu Khan images, but in Turkey there are a few busts of the following gentlemen, and Batu Khan is one of them. And look at the dates on these. This is real interesting and quite hard to figure out. These 1368 to 1507, Timur. 552 to 743. 1526 to 1858. 375 to 454. Now that year range seems like something we're used to. But 1526 to 1858? But what's going on with this guy? Now you'll notice in all these maps of Tartaria, all they need to do is cross the Bering Strait to get to Alaska. And we could see that there are cities already established over here in Canada or the United States. In fact, California is marked on this map. And there's a lot of different maps like this one which show the color to signify which kind of country is in control of that area. We could see yellow here for Tartaria And it looks like that extends into the United States. And sure enough, if you look up here, it says that there are Tartarians in this area with the society, and we can cross-reference that on the Urbano-Monet map. If we go across the Bering Strait into America, we can see that all the way over here into Canada, that right up here there is these camps of Tartars. And I will say that the information on this map seems very accurate. As you go into the North Dakota area, you will find buffalo drawn, even though they're bad drawings, and you can translate this, and it says that here are animals that look like horses or cows, but they have a mane like a lion, and that's the perfect description for a buffalo. And it says there's a hump on their back like a camel. And again, this is right in the area where North Dakota's at, Yellowstone. So the fact that we have buffalo in the Yellowstone area, I would say the information on this map is quite accurate. I can't figure out the Griffin part. However, it does have Tartarians listed in Canada and multiple cities down here in America, including San Francisco. Much prior to the founding of San Francisco in 1850, just south of San Francisco, we could see that there are volcanoes. Once again, another map saying that America was discovered in 1492 by Christopher Columbus. However, up here there is a society is beginning on the land, and they are Tartarians. So who was here? Who discovered the land? I mean, you can't say Christopher Columbus discovered the land when it already says the Tartarians are already here with the society. Here we have a map of the universe, and Grand Tartary taking up this entire area. That they have essentially conquered this entire area. Even in a time when North and South America are accurately mapped, we still have Grand Tartary as this massive area, and China, the Mongol, and Persia. So definitely you can't say that the Tartarians are just Mongols. The Mongols are down here. Here we have America split in half. Presumably maybe the pink is for the European settlers who had started on the East Coast and moved to the West. And it says here, having achieved the conquest, the Tartars and their descendants had a much harder task to perform, and this was to subdue the ferocious and warlike European colonists who had entrenched and fortified themselves in the country. So another reference that America was originally land of the Tartarians. Here is the Daily Nebraska State Journal talking about the area which we would have seen on the map over here, where these buffalo are near Nebraska, where we know Tartarians are nearby. And it says here, Tartarax, where Rax is Latin for king, so this would mean Tartar king. The monarch returns to his old realm of Quiveria. He reigns for a day. An illustration of the mythology of Nebraska. So Nebraska is already saying that there was a Tartar king who is going to return to Nebraska, to his realm of Quiveria.
But there's an interesting quote in his book by Buffalo Bill Cody, published in 1920. He says, while we were in the Sandhills scouting the Niobrara country, the Pawnee Indians brought into camp some very large bones, one of which the surgeon of the expedition pronounced to be the thigh bone of a human being. The Indians said the bones were those of a race of people who long ago had lived in that country. They said these people were 3 times the size of a man of the present day. And they were so swift and strong that they could run by the side of a buffalo, and taking the animal in one arm could tear off a leg and eat it as they ran. I don't know what to make of that. It's in his autobiography. It's published in 1920. I don't think he was worried about UFOs and stuff, but it is a interesting allusion to the Indian lessons.
Here is a picture of Nebraska in 1898. And I would like to draw attention to the architecture in the background. Look at the statues up here. Look at some of this magnificent architecture. This building back here. It is not something I would expect to find in Nebraska in 1898. But perhaps it had been there a very long time, as there was a Tartarian king at this area previously. The official history is hiding a major world power which existed as late as the 19th century. Tartary was a country with its own flag, its own government, its own place on the map. Its territory was huge, but somehow quietly incorporated into Russia and some other countries. Here is an engram of Google Books which shows how Tartaria was quietly put away throughout the years. Tartary and Tartaria show up in books very frequently, very popular topic in books, and as we got closer to 1850, 1900 and 1950, it just pretty much disappeared and nobody talked about it anymore. However, sometime in the 18th century, Tartary Muscovite was the biggest country in the world with 3 million square miles. In just 1744, we can see they had more land than any other country, of course. Bellum Tartaricum, or the conquest of the great, renowned empire of China by the invasion of the Tartars. History of the conquest of China by the Tartaries. Voyage and Travels, the complete history of Muscovy and Tartary. The army of the Tartars, the kingdom of the Tartars, the emperors of the Tartars, the wandering life of the Tartars. Now, if you were to go to Ancestry.com and order a genealogy test from your DNA, do you think that it would tell you if Tartarians were in your bloodline? Tartary had its own language, its own flag, its own emperor, and of course it had its own people who are completely removed from history at this point. Here we have 7 distinct characters in costume and 6 different languages: Russian, German, English, French, Tartarian, and Italian. Wherefore it's impossible to write anything in the Tartarian language. The Tartarian tablets, the inscribed tablets found in Romania, may be 1,000 years older than the oldest examples of writing from Mesopotamia. Here's a book called Fem Im Den from 1929, an anti-religious, whatever that means, magazine in the Tartarian language. I've found a copy of it here. And here is the book written in the Tartarian language. Fem Ham Den 1, 1929. Here's a genealogy of the former Tartar emperors. And of course they have a complete genealogy here of all of their emperors. Of course, multiple depictions of the people of Tartary. I've talked about this image before in a previous video about Christopher Columbus. And this hand symbol is the same hand symbol that Christopher Columbus uses. Also, why is he holding his hand like this with the 2 middle fingers together, the index and the pinky separated? You'd think it's just random, you know, the painter decided to paint it that way. But upon looking further into history and at older drawings and paintings of Tartarians, the people of Tartary, you'll find that they all, interestingly, have the same hand symbol with the 2 middle fingers together, the index and the pinky separated. Here we have it, here we have it, and here we have it. So it's no coincidence that once the Tartarians had been removed from history, we find people like Christopher Columbus secretly making their hand symbol in his paintings. Here he is with his beloved globe, as his discovery proved that to be fact. And we'll even look at some older paintings, some maps that that have Christopher Columbus in them. Here is a text about Christopher Columbus and a portrait of his bust, as well as you will find him over here encountering Native Americans, but also an unknown type of people who have weapons and shields, clothes, and skin color which does not resemble any of the Native Americans that he was supposed to encounter. Surprisingly enough, we'll also find information on this map about the Tartarians and how they were definitely in this area of the world at the time when Christopher Columbus came here. That's probably why you'll notice somebody like this, who you would actually expect to find existing in a city that looked more along the lines of these. But a future video is going to cover the World Columbian Exposition in Chicago, where we'll discuss the possibility that this city was not built of plaster and stucco, but it was in fact already in America when Columbus got here, and that is why they had to completely burn the whole thing to the ground and leave no trace of it, because that would in fact reveal the truth that when Christopher Columbus got to America, he encountered a people who have been completely removed from the history books. But before we go in too deep to what he found when he got here, we see a clear distinction between the Mongols and the Tartars. 1865 Standard Atlas of the World. We still have flags for the Kingdom of Tartary. The flag and crest of Tartary had an owl depicted on it, and the Emperor's flag contained a griffin on a yellow background. Here is the Empire of Tartary and their owl. In the History of the Inductive Sciences by William Wilhelm, a catastrophe annihilated that highly scientific nation, which, according to Bailey, existed in remote ages in the center of Tartary. And this book even takes it so far to say that the data collected by Ptolemy was in fact observations made in Tartary itself, and that the determination of the circumference of the earth reported by Aristotle could not have been executed by either the Greeks nor by any of the ancient known peoples. And the conclusion is that the ancient people who perfected the sciences, the people who formerly carried out the great enterprise of the exact measurement of earth, lived at the parallel of 49 degrees, and that is the Tartars, based from our most exact modern observations. And he's saying that the root of this astronomical knowledge does not come from Aristotle and Ptolemy, but in fact it comes from the Tartarians. American Antiquities and Discoveries in the West from 1834, an exhibition of evidence that an ancient population of partially civilized nations differing entirely from those of the present Indians lived in America many centuries before its discovery by Columbus. So we can see that Tartarians have been removed from history. They were a kingdom with kings and culture and people and armies, and they were conquering the entire world. They owned more land than anybody. There's hints that they had more people than anybody else in the world, and that they did in fact cross the Bering Strait, come into the United States, and start building cities in the United States and Canada. In the following videos, we will look at the cities which they have established in the United States. There are photographs and evidence of the Tartarian cities that have now been completely destroyed and removed from the history books. The only thing left is they say there was some Indians here who ran around with teepees, but the truth is, if we look at our history, we will find that there were massive cities here in the United States which have all now been destroyed, and there are very few remnants left over of those cities. But one of them, as already seen, is in Nebraska, and architecture built by Tartarians would have still been around in Omaha before it was destroyed in the previous 100 years. And when we look at North America and all of the magnificent architecture that was destroyed, for example here in San Francisco, this does not align with architecture that could have been built by the early American settlers. It is in fact architecture that was already here, and it was built by the Tartarians. Of course, the Tartarians had made their way into North America and were building cities here. They had cities. We could see the difference between the Tartarian architecture of San Francisco and what the American settlers were able to build with their skills, but certainly not the grand architecture that they inherited when they came to America. So the link of the ability to build grand architecture and perhaps a special genius to build such exquisite architecture and phenomenal fountains such as this one, which is carved completely out of stone. It has a hollow stone sphere that rotates in this fountain and also lights up. It had a light on the inside of it, and we know from these photos from the early 1900s that these fountains have significant wear and tear on them. They're falling apart, and they certainly are much, much older than 1850, which is the year San Francisco was founded. No, this is absolutely Tartarian architecture, a Tartarian-built fountain, which was destroyed by Freemasons during the Great World Fairs.